if you're here, you've seen the title, and you probably don't enjoy being here. And by that I mean you're forced to live, and you feel the weight of every second that passes, and you just don't want to be here. And hopefully, as I talk to myself, um, I can convince you that that's okay, and it's not inherently bad to yearn to not be here on this planet, to not live. Um, because I'm in the same boat. I am at a place currently where I only live to serve others. I'm a Christian, and I feel entirely useless unless I'm helping other people and serving others. And I don't enjoy being here. And I think, especially among Christians, but I think elsewhere as well, there's a bit of a stigma around, you know, depression and then like suicidal thoughts, right? I've heard from many, usually older, right? People that call themselves Christians that say, oh, there's people dying for their faith. You should be grateful that we live in a place that's peaceful and things like that. Um, and I don't think they understand that people like me would, without a doubt, trade this situation for that, right? We would 100% be a martyr for Christianity, and that kind of just it sounds really bad to the people that don't understand this headspace. And I think that's why there's a lot of judgment around it, because they don't get that living is easier, or sorry, living is harder than dying, right? I think I can say that without a doubt. It's harder to choose to live because it's something you have to do every single day than to die. Death happens just one time, and for those of us that have faced suicide, I think we have a pretty unique look on life where we realize that there's not too much of a point of clinging to it. And there's some biblical backing to that, but I think also we should find purpose and peace and contentment, I suppose, with living. I think there is definitely a line that needs to be found, and I personally know I need to get on the good side of it, but I don't like that in Christianity. There's a lot of comparison. It's so comparative and it's so judgy, right? To the point where I think to myself, I live in a part of the United States where just kind of culturally Christianity is the norm. Everyone sort of calls themselves Christians, whether or not they actually know Christ or not, or follow His commands or do literally anything that would otherwise indicate that they're Christian. They kind of just say they are and leave it at that. Um, and when those people come at me or others and say, basically, you have no right to be depressed or you have no right to be suicidal, it angers me because it's entirely unfair. There's an unspoken detail of um, sanctification that if you are stagnant in your walk with Christ, then you won't be challenged. Like Satan will let you sit where you are because he has you exactly where he wants you to be. He has you being stagnant. And so when those kinds of people say that, oh, it could be so much worse, you could go and you could die, right, for your faith, you can go be murdered as a martyr or something. Um, they just don't get it because they haven't been challenged. And I would even go as far as to argue that some of those people don't understand the depth and the emotion behind Christianity. what a sacrifice it is to choose to live every day and pursue God and Christ over yourself and over everything else. And I do practice apologetics and eschatology, um, eschatology being the bit that I'm going to lean on here. And as a Christian, I find suicide so difficult to justify, but I believe the majority of Christians that take a stance on suicide probably have never felt the cold barrel of their grandpa's gun under their chin, and therefore lack a sense of authority over the topic. I think there's just too much dismissal, too hasty of conclusions that come from people that don't really know what they're talking about. And that's over many subjects, not just depression and suicide, but, you know, maybe I'll cover those in other talks. But if you take a look at Job, right, premium example, Job loses everything, right? He basically goes through a gauntlet of challenges. Satan goes directly to God and asks, like, hey, Job wouldn't be a follower of you if you had not blessed him. Job was basically a rich guy with a beautiful family and everything you could possibly want. And God is like, no, Job is a true servant of mine. And he tells Satan that he has permission to go and basically take everything away from him. And so he does. Job's family dies. He loses all of his wealth. And he becomes sick himself, to the point of just every second is painful, right? Both physically, emotionally, and mentally, of course. And in Job 3:11, Job says this. He says, "Why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb?" And I think a lot of us can relate to that, where you wonder if God knew how painful it would be to live right now, how hard it is, why would he let me live at all? In a similar sense, I think about that with my past relationship. If he knew the sins me and my ex were going to commit, if he knew how it was going to go, why would he let me get with her, right? Why would I ever be allowed to be her boyfriend, that kind of thing? But just in a life perspective, that we could genuinely think it's better for us to never have been born, because then we wouldn't have inconvenienced maybe the people that we feel like we've inconvenienced in life. We wouldn't be feeling these pains, things like that. We wouldn't annoy anybody. We wouldn't be a burden to anybody. It's unhealthy, of course. It's not a good thought, but it's a thought that is present and covered in the Bible. I think, just a slight side tangent here, I think the Old Testament, at least geographically where I come from, the Old Testament is just null and void to most Christians, and I think that's disgusting. My mom's side's Jewish, kind of a fun fact, and so I've always put a good bit of emphasis on the Old Testament. There's so much wisdom there, and it's really helped me just throughout my life, but really in regards to things like discipline and finding that purpose. And I lean on it pretty heavily even now, the Proverbs and the Psalms. And so, I don't know, I would just encourage you, if you're Christian or not, just have a look at some of that wisdom, right? Take it as an academic text, if not a religious one, and just look at it. But it's hard because in Job's situation, God basically comes to him after all these things. Job calls out to him. He remains faithful as a servant, and Job gets everything back and more. It's a nice example of when you let yourself basically lose things for the purpose of your faith, God can bless you abundantly beyond what you thought was possible. But if I'm being honest, that's not necessarily the case for us all. It's not a promise that our suffering will be inverted into blessing, and thus the more we suffer, the more we'll be blessed. That's not that's not the promise that's given to us, and it's absolutely unfair to so many people that they will have harder lives than other people. It's not that we should seek suffering to be basically repaid to us through blessing. It's that there's a purpose behind all of the suffering. Had I not tried to kill myself and then lost my high school um, girlfriend, to lust, I wouldn't be emotionally intelligent, at least as much as I am. I wouldn't have gained a lot of the wisdom of empathy and things like that. And I also wouldn't, there's just so much wisdom and so much authority I think I have over certain topics that because I face those issues, I let myself sit in my emotions and fully process things. I didn't try to be stoic and I didn't try to be nonchalant, and I was very transparent with my friends and things like that. I feel like I approached it in the right way. And even though I still do sit in depression and my quality of life is still, you know, pretty crappy and I still don't like being here, I can't say that I haven't found a little bit more purpose and a little bit more motivation over this past year. Even though I look around and my room's a mess, and I've got laundry on my bed, right? I do remember a time when I couldn't leave my bed and my roommate would have to come in here and give me food. And if that's where you are, then just respect the process. Not necessarily trust it. You don't have to trust it. I would like you to, but I'm not going to tell you to, but respect it. Because Christian or not, I think regardless of what you believe, it can't perpetually get worse. If you're intentional, if you seek help, right? And I know there's some people out there that feel like there's no one, or that you don't want to be a burden to anybody, and I get that. I get that. I'm more of like the group therapist nowadays, and I hate leaning on others because so many lean on me. If you can relate to that, I understand, right? It's tough for us as the people who are the rocks, basically, for so many other people. We're so many people's foundations. It's hard for us to also lean on others. But you have to consider that if so many people are leaning on you, you can lean also against them, and it'll be mutually beneficial. And I understand if you don't believe me, because I certainly didn't believe that at a certain time, at multiple points in my life, actually, I think. But just trust me on that. And if it turns out that you lean on certain people and they're not okay with it, then those aren't the people that you want to be leaning on you. Because quite frankly, if someone is going to reject a mutualistic relationship, then you shouldn't be in it. Whether that be just friends or family or romantically motivated, any form of relationship, any form of love, right? It should be mutualistic. There's no real room for commensalism in the long term. I understand that there's going to be phases where people need more help, right? They need more support. And people like us can absolutely understand that. We want to pour out that support. We want to be that for other people. But we need it too. And so in the short term, yeah, if you've got to pour a little extra into somebody because they're having a tough time, that's fine. But we also sit there. We need people to pour into us. And I really wish that you guys would seek that out. And I'll switch over. I use Job. That's the Old Testament. The Apostle Paul is well known for yearning for death. He just kind of explicitly says it in 1 Corinthians 5. I don't have the verse off the top of my head, but he's in prison in Rome facing trial. He probably figures that he's going to be executed. but he knows that at his trial he's going to proclaim Christ. He's already mentally made that decision. And so he says, to live is Christ and to die is gain. And he goes on by saying that he yearns not to be here, but that because he can see all of the good that he's doing for the people that he is serving, the people that he loves, the churches he's planted and worked with and things like that, he sees it as worth it for the kingdom to remain living for that purpose of serving others and loving others. And I think that's a beautiful thing, because I think a lot of us can relate to the fact that possibly the only anchor keeping us here is love. It's not the love that we're receiving. Maybe it is, but I think maybe at a worse off level, it's the love that we give others that's keeping us here. Because we have the hope that because we love in such a deep way, in such an honest way, in a raw way, that there are others out there that love the same way we do. And that's absolutely true. I believe that's absolutely true. And I mean, of course, I yearn so much, so deeply romantically to find, my wife, should she be out there, right? But I would say that the majority of the love that I'm referring to right now is non-romantic. It's the friends that will truly love you regardless, right? Because in my opinion, romance is kind of a one-on-one thing. That romantic love, if you find that pure and raw romantic love that's as deep as the way you love, then you latch onto that person and that becomes your partner for life. Best case scenario, right? If it's optimal. But you can find multiple friends. You can forge an entire friend group around an authentic love that supports each other, builds each other up, magnifies each other's good, and things like that. You can find multiple people like that across your life. And I would argue that that's also an extremely powerful form of love that is beautiful and worth living for. And I am an introvert by nature, so I'm drawn to isolationism, right? If you're familiar with the love languages, mine is quality time. They say just the inverse of that is whatever you do when you're basically depressed, and so it's absolutely true. I'm drawn to self-isolation, right? Because I don't like being around others when I'm not feeling the vibes, right? When I'm not a vibey person myself, I don't want people to see me like that. Um, but I have to be real and I have to be authentic. I have to have people that understand me, that are also emotionally intelligent. I think this is really important. You need to find people that are emotionally intelligent enough to understand your depth, right? I'm in college, of course, and so there's absolutely a lack of that. 100% there's a lack of that. There's people who I could not be basically deep friends with because they lack that depth. And I think it is quite unfortunate. But I think that because we gain, like emotional intelligence and maturity through pain, that if you are kind of in my age group or even younger, maybe even a little bit older, right, that it's going to be a bit harder to find, people our age that we could be friends with that have that same level of maturity. And I know in high school, right, the people that could relate to me in that were people that I basically trauma bonded with. And while trauma bonding isn't great, inherently by nature, it's a little bit of a negative way to start a relationship, but I don't think it's a bad way, right? I think a trauma bonded friendship can become a long lasting and loving friendship. But you just have to be diligent and intentional about making that the case, if that makes sense. Um, but I have plenty of other biblical examples that I can use to tell you that it's okay to not want to be here. Christ himself said that this isn't our home, so we're gonna feel a bit of dissonance, right, with being here. We're gonna yearn to go home to heaven. Um, And you don't have to believe that to just kind of understand the feeling that you see peace in death, or just ease, right? Release. Um, your stress and anxiety can't get to you. Your overthinking can't get to you if you're dead, right? And while that is true, it's better, not easier. It's absolutely harder, but it is better to find reasons to live and to be content with living. And I'm not one of the Christians that's going to tell you that you need to just convince yourself of something, just convince yourself that, oh, living's good and I should not be depressed. That's not how it works. I get that. I understand that. I'm never going to say that. But you do need to find healthy anchors to life. There was a time where the only thing keeping me alive was the promise I made to my ex the night she left me, when I promised her that I would find a way to live without her. I would say for about 2 months that's the only thing that kept me alive. But that was a toxic motivation. It gave me some false hope in that maybe if I worked hard enough and I built myself up and I changed, that I would get her back. That did not happen, right? But I'm not going to tell you not to use those things as anchors, because if I was to say that, then I would be saying that I wouldn't be here saying this. Actually, I would be dead myself. So don't hate on yourself in the short term, right? For using what could be interpreted as negative things as your anchors to life, but do make sure that your intent and you're working towards replacing them with healthier anchors. Replace them with, your family. I've got 2 little sisters who, if I would have killed myself 5 years ago, they wouldn't have remembered me, but now they would. And so I can't do that to them. And I've got friends whose relationships I've saved, well, helped save, with my wisdom, who would question a lot of the wisdom I've poured into them if I was to kill myself. And because I believe what I believe so passionately, I couldn't possibly do that to them. And so those are way healthier anchors to life than, hoping my ex will come back, that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, some of the most influential and well-known men and women, mostly men, at least to my memory. The examples I came up with are all men, actually, so my bad. But most of the influential people in the Bible, or many of the influential people in the Bible, we've got Samson, obviously Paul and Job are pretty well-known names, even Moses, all at one point yearned for death, because living is hard. Living is harder than dying, but I'm committed to helping people and giving people a place to be. And so, if you'll meet me here tomorrow and you'll listen, I'll see you then. I hope I do, because I don't want my voice to just be empty words. I want them to be filled with authenticity and love above all things. So, I'll use you guys as an anchor of mine. Because if the pain I've gone through can help just one more person, if I can help one more person escape the pains I've felt, then living is absolutely worth it. Thank you for listening. I love you, and I'll see you tomorrow.